All right, so I can check that. Okay, cool. All right, so when you go to, I'm going to close everything down here. If you don't have your note paper out, get your note paper out because you want to take notes. You can access this several different ways. If you have never been to Canvas, obviously use the better way of the two. If you're used to going one way, you have a bookmark, whatever, just use that. If you go to My Macomb, you guys have been to My Macomb before, you've registered for classes, right? That's how you get to that. Somewhere on here it says Canvas. So you can just click on Canvas and then it'll take you right into Canvas, okay? Now, we don't need to do it now, but what I want you to do is before next class, we're not here Monday, remember, because of Martin Luther King Day. We will be here on Wednesday. So before Wednesday, I want you to make sure you can get into Canvas, and to verify it, you should be able to click on the course here. You should be able to click on our course, which is 2510. And then you should be able to go to discussions, and under please introduce yourself, make a little post, introduce yourself. Okay, that way I verified that you've gotten in. Don't do it now, do it later. That way you can have time to write it up and spell check it and everything else. Make sure it's professional, make sure you dotted your I's and crossed your T's, all that stuff.
Excuse me, what about discussions again?
I want you to go to the please introduce yourself one. Yep, and then just do a reply here and then introduce yourself. Just a couple sentences just to verify that you've gotten into the system. When we have stuff that we need to access through Canvas or we have a test, I want to make sure that you have no issues getting into it. Okay. Now, when I start publishing stuff, like so today's lecture is being recorded. After it's recorded, it's going to be under modules. And this is where I put all of my stuff. So right now I have other assignments up here. I'm just going to hide those other assignments so you can't see them until we're ready to actually see the assignments. Okay, but when you go to modules, everything will be there. So today's lecture, it'll say day 1 playing is what I typically call it, because this is what we're going to do today, just play with the software and get used to using some of the tools. We'll also have in here the first day handout. I apparently didn't update this one yet, so I'll update that.
Yeah, it's not fall 2017.
Right, not anymore. The definitions are here, the hotkeys are here. I'll pass those out today too, so you will have a hard copy to actually hold in your hands. But any lectures I provide, they will be on YouTube, but they'll be right here. This is easier to find than trying to go through my entire playlist of YouTube videos. I teach 5 classes today, so there'll be 5 lectures up on YouTube today. If you go here, there'll just be 1 for this class. Okay, so that's typically what we're going to be doing. Also, as we start getting stuff graded, you can go to grades and then you can start looking at your grades to see what you got in assignment and why you got that thing. Okay, so keep track of that as we get more in there. Cool. Questions on Canvas? It's pretty simple. All right, close that, close that. Close that. All right. So something like this is an animated storyboard. So now what you're seeing here is more of a mix of Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever, hand-drawn, scanned in, cut out stuff, and After Effects. And what this does is, again, gives them that same sense of what things are going to be in the shot, how things are going to move. But really, they're just kind of looking at pacing. Like, how is this story kind of flowing from one shot to the next to the next? And before they hired any actors, somebody sat down and drew these. Typically, somebody does the drawing. They get them approved. They hand them over to an artist, and the artist will go through and cut out all the pieces of the character and then start animating them. So if you look, like her hand and her purse are moving, but her coat wasn't. Let me rewind that in a second, right there. So in order for that to happen, if I were to draw the character like that, in order for me to be able to separate those things, I would have to cut those things out and then animate the arm separately than the jacket. If you've had Morgan, what class is that where they do the book? Just Flash 2. If you've had Flash 2, they do an interactive book where it's very similar. They scan in all the pages of the book. They have to cut out certain features. They have to clone stamp in all those backgrounds, and then they can create these animations on top of it. So it looks like it's a full-blown, character drawn out separate thing, but it's not. And this kind of thing is obviously going to have a lot quicker turnaround than the 3D one would. The 3D one, you're looking at a few weeks. Something like this, you could probably get done in a week if you're talented enough at Photoshop. But you can see here, all these things are separated. These columns are separate from the background from these. If you've had previs and you've drawn something in there and you're like, hey, this looks kind of cool, but what does it actually look like when it moves? That's what this area would take us into. Sweet. So that's one of the areas of pre-production that we would fit into that. Now for production, that could mean any number of things, okay? Depending on the movie, depending on what stuff they're using. So for something like Toy Story, all the production is in the movie, okay? All the 3D is production stuff. So here's Toy Story stuffs. So this is all production. Now if they were to do this kind of movie, this is the production side. In their pre-production, they're doing all the testing and planning and visuals for it. So like for Monsters, Inc., when that movie first came out, hair, fur, and clothing was something that 3D didn't handle very well. So in pre-production, they had people who were just developing what does hair and fur look like in the computer, how do we get it to simulate, how do we get it to work correctly. For Toy Story, they would go through and say, how do we make them look better, but not detract from what they were before. If you remember Nemo was a very lifelike, cartoony character. At one point, they pushed the level of the realism in the movie that it actually looked like too realistic. Like Nemo looked like an actual clownfish, like realistic clownfish with obviously cartoony features, and they had to dial it back so that the style maintained the look that they were after. So the same thing here with Toy Story 3. They had to make sure it didn't look 10 times better than Toy Story 2 or 100 times better than Toy Story 1, because they wanted to maintain that fluency from movie to movie to movie. Now, if you look at Woody 1 and Woody 3, there is a huge difference, but not enough that you're typically going to notice it. What was that? What?
Woody 1 and Woody 3, is that like the Woodies from, are they like 3 different models of Woody, or Woody from Toy Story versus Woody from Toy Story 3?
Yep.
I just didn't really...
Yeah, if you look at, seriously, nobody? Maybe if I type the right thing, Woody from Toy Story 1, Toy Story 3. I saw something a bit ago where they actually had like a side-by-side of it. Well, you can look at that there. I mean, Andy, look at him, right? Really cartoony, really flat looking. That's like, wow. You know, there's a huge difference.
I thought the age was the only thing that oh, there's an actual Woody.
In that one, yep. I think this one too has a comparison. Oh, it's Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, that doesn't matter. That one? There we go. Yep, so if you look at his hat, you can definitely tell a huge difference there. His coloring, his lighting. Again, they don't want to go too far that it's going to be completely different. I can move this more. Too far that's completely different, but they do want to obviously show that there is an improvement from one version to the next, because they do have to stay up to date. If you look at some of Pixar's earliest stuff, short films, baby. So this is like one of their very first animations. Now Pixar started off as a company that wanted to do animations, and it was basically everything that you're seeing is stuff that they wrote from the ground up. So right now we have 3D software. We have 3D software because people at Pixar built the 3D software and the tools that we use today. That's like the weirdest looking baby. It's pretty scary. Now you take that and you compare it to the toys in actual Toy Story, and you'll see again there's a huge difference in how they're showing that story and how they're doing that. So part of the pre-production of something like Toy Story is going into it and actually figuring out what the look of it is going to be compared to the looks of other films. Now for something like Avengers, there's the Infinity trailer. So for something like this, their production side would be doing a lot of just filming. So they're going out there and they have green screens and they're filming people and they're actors and they're doing all this stuff. If there's any practical explosions or chase scenes or whatever else, they're filming all of that. And then what happens is when they get back to the computer where they're all done editing, they'll go into the post-production side, and that's where all the CG typically happens. Now, all of those areas are going to be blended, depending on what movie, depending on the technology, depending on their budget. Sometimes the pre-production will actually flow into the production, and they'll use some of that same stuff. When they filmed Avatar, James Cameron didn't want to look at a computer and see this is the 3D world. He actually had a laptop or a tablet that was hooked up to a system where he could walk inside this room and look around and see the entire environment, and he could frame shots and he could say we need more stuff here or more stuff there or whatever. And that was like live during the production side, so they were actually working on the pre-production and post all at the same time, which is pretty amazing. All right, so that looks pretty awesome, but let's look at ILM. Behind. This is a YouTube channel. Can't think of the guy's name. I just lost it. Does it say it there? Nope. Can't think of his name. Whatever. Nick? I think his name is Nick something. Anyway, so they talk about all the stuff that's inside cinema, new techniques, different ways to do things. They'll break stuff down. It's really awesome what they do here. So they'll show you here, animating with music. 5 years ago in Maya, if you wanted to animate this by hand, you're basically animating each ball to that. Inside Cinema, that was already built in. So you could just basically load an audio clip, create a cloner, and add stuff together, okay? So don't focus too much on learning just the specific software. The tools are what's important because those tools carry over to every other software that we're going to be touching on, okay? But it's all about style. It's all about just creating cool stuff. This is another, like, yeah. I want to see that. And for the most part, it's just like interesting, neat stuff that they create. Like that. And you'll find cinema is actually pretty quick. Now, there are some things that cinema doesn't do well, but we'll just deal with it. It doesn't do texturing well. It is true. It's horrible. Typically, if I'm going to texture something, I'll take it out of cinema, texture it outside, and then I will bring it back. But it does, even modeling, I typically like Maya modeling better because I'm more comfortable with it, but there are people who are great at modeling inside of cinema. Cool. That's still playing in the background. Some things too, you may even find like the main character is animated, modeled, and whatever else inside Maya, but then the backgrounds are built in something else, and then they're just put together in another application. Even in Shrek, there's no way they could have Shrek, Donkey, and Princess all in the same scene with those beautiful backgrounds. So what they would do is they would render out, here's the ground, here's the back plate, here's a tree or two trees, here's Shrek, here's Donkey, here's Princess, and then they would layer all this stuff together. So yeah, there's a lot of work that can go into it, we're in this class, we're going to keep it simple, but in later classes, we get more and more in depth. This is a 3D production pipeline is what they call it. So here is where you can use 3D along the way and all the different things that would go into it. Every company has a different way that they work. Some companies, it's one person, so they literally have to go from one step to the next step to the next step. At a place like Pixar or a place like ILM, which are huge houses, they are basically, by the time they get to the rigging and setup here, they've already been working on that way back there. Before they even had the idea for Frozen, they had people out in the snow-covered, I want to say it was Vancouver. I'm probably wrong. Let's just pretend it's Vancouver. They were in Vancouver looking at snow, playing with the snow, trying to figure out how snow would work, and they had to build an entire snow dynamics engine for the Frozen movie. So over here, they are doing all this stuff way up at the front. In a place where you're just one person or you're just a small team, this is exactly how you're going to be following your stuff, okay? Every company is going to be different. Don't focus in on what they're doing specifically until you get there, okay? So some companies will do this, this, this. Other ones will switch things around. Some people will animate before they rig, or they're rigging before they animate, or whatever. Cool. All right. That's enough talk. Let's actually get into it. Just like any other software or program or whatever assignment that we would do, we have to have some way to organize our stuff. If you've had After Effects, you know how intense having movies and still images and audio files and all this other stuff can be. 3D is no different. Actually, it's probably a little bit more that way because sometimes you don't even see that your stuff is missing until you go to render, and then you have to figure out where it is. So the top part of this little cheat sheet is how we're going to be organizing our stuff. And then the bottom part is all how we're going to be naming and saving and what we're going to be turning in. So hang on to this. This is something you can hold the entire semester. This one we'll start filling out as we get into the assignment and actually start building stuff, okay? All right, so everyone has their computer up? Yes? Okay. Rule number 1, do not save anything to the desktop. Do not work off the desktop. The C drive is a no saving zone. If the computer reboots, the C drive goes away, okay? So anything you put on the desktop is gone. So don't save anything to the desktop. On your computer, you should have I believe it's a P drive. So if you hit, I'm big into hotkeys, so Window E. You hit Window E, that should bring up your This PC. And then on the left side, it should say This PC, and then you should see a C drive and a P drive. Is that correct? Yeah, we're the first class working on these computers, so it should be empty, okay? Do not rely on your P drive to be the only spot you save your stuff. If somebody comes in next class and for whatever reason they accidentally delete your stuff, we'll never know until we come back and then it's already gone, okay? So anything you work on in the class, make sure you have it on a thumb drive and then save it off at the end of the day. Or email it to yourself or create a Dropbox account and Dropbox it, whatever works for you. On my computer, I don't have a P drive, I have a D drive. So just ignore the fact that mine is a different letter. I'm going to put mine into a folder here. All right, so you're going to make a new folder and you're going to call it your last name underscore W18. Okay. So your last name underscore W18. Does anyone here have me for multiple classes? I don't think so. You do. The next one, yeah. No one else does. Okay, cool. All right, so then go into that folder. And when I get into any application, my first thing is, what are the hotkeys? Because I want to work as quickly as possible. Does anyone know the hotkey for new folder? Control-Shift-N. Okay, so just start working with hotkeys. The quicker you get with working, the faster your assignments are going to go. So Control-Shift-N, make a new folder, call it 2510. Okay, my last name underscore W18 is the my folder. So anything that I save for this class, I'm going to put inside there. 2510 is this specific class. So if you had multiple classes, I would put those inside that, 2510, whatever else you have. All right, so go inside the 2510 folder, and we're going to make a new folder, and we're going to call it your last name underscore template project. All right, so this structure that's on this card, that's what we're going to be creating. But what we want to do is every project is going to have the same exact structure, so it makes more sense to make one folder set up this way and then just duplicate it for each project that we're going to be working on. It makes your life a little bit easier, okay? So go into template project and make each one of these folders. So textures, scenes, renders, final, reference.
What were they again?
They're on your little cheat sheet there at the very top.
Textures, scenes, renders, final, and reference.
Cool. All right, so we have this template project now. So what we want to do is we never want to put anything inside this template project. It is only for us to be able to take this template and duplicate it and start our next actual real project, okay? So we're going to go back a folder. So if you're new to PCs, I'll show you 3 ways to do this. One way, you hit the back button here. I'll show you 4 ways, okay? One way is this back button. One way is this up button. One way is to click on the folder before it. And then the other way is just hit the backspace key. I hit the backspace key because it's right there. Okay? So there's our template project. So I want to take that and I want to duplicate it. So if I just Control C, Control V, that would copy it. And then I'm going to get rid of the template project copy part and just put mini room. Okay, so it says Sarcona mini room, Sarcona template project. Cool, everyone's good? Yeah. If at any point I go too fast or you're not there yet, just say, hold up a second, let me get a minute, and then we'll do it. Yes, sir?
Did you duplicate that and just change the name?
Yep. So Control C and Control V duplicates. If you want another hotkey, hold Control and drag something, and that's another way to copy stuff. Okay? Stay organized. If at any point during the class you get unorganized, stop, reorganize yourself, and then fix it. Okay? Because what you don't want to do is, okay, this is not what you're doing, but I'm just going to show you what students do, is they have this folder, and then for whatever reason they've copied this in here, and then they've copied this again, and they copied that inside there, and then this goes in here. And then they're working off of one of these folders, and they don't know where it is, and they have 10 different copies of their files all over the place, okay? This structure that I have set up should be super simple enough. What? Yes, you're not going to be able to sync up. Try again. There we go. Okay. Ooh. Our first project is going to be mini room. That's what we're going to start off with. Okay. So let's go into what these folders are going to do. So final is actually what we're going to be turning in. On here, you'll see there's movie, file, and compression settings, and then still, file, and compression settings on this card. So when we turn in a still image, that's the settings you're going to use. When we turn in a movie, that's the settings you're going to use. Okay? So keep this card because you want to have that so you know this is what I'm going to be turning in. So that's what would go into the final. So typically it would be 1 still, 5 stills, 10 stills, whatever it is. It would be a movie and stills, whatever that case is. Yes, sir?
Are we putting both stills and movies into the file?
Each project would have a different criteria. So some of them will be one movie, some of them will be a still, some will be both. Okay? Like the drone project, you do a still and a movie. So that one you would have both of those images in there, or both of those things. Reference is anything that is stuff that you want to research. So when we do the drone, you go out there and you grab 7,000 pictures of drones. throw them in your reference folder. That way you have them right there. You can always look them up, okay? Renders is stuff that we render out. When we work inside Cinema, what happens is we build something. So we build a creature, okay? We put color on him, we put light on him, we animate it, and then when we render this out, what that's doing is it's telling the software, okay, this is what it looks like in the software, but actually calculate what do the shadows look like, what do reflections look like, what do all those things that make it look realistic look like, and it outputs a file, a single image per frame into this folder. Okay, so that's where we're going to be saving out all of those. So if we had a 500 frame animation, we would get 500 files out of here. And then we would take those 500 files into After Effects and make a movie, and then we would save it into our final folder. Okay? Our scenes is where we're going to actually save anything from Cinema. So when we are working on a project and we go to save, every scene goes into the scenes folder. For textures, any pictures we bring in that we want to actually make something look like something else. So we have a flat wall inside Cinema. I want it to look like brick. So I find a picture of brick on the internet and I want it to be on there. I put it inside my textures folder, okay? You'll see more of these as we go, why we organize them this way. In some projects, you may have 50, 60, 100 different textures inside there. And you may have, for some of my students, hundreds of scene files for even a single project because they want to save as and save as and save as so they don't lose anything, okay? So we want to keep everything nice and separated and organized. Cool? So you should have a P drive, you should have a last name Winter 18, you should have a 2510, and you should have your last name mini room with all these folders in here. Everyone cool? Everyone not cool? Good. Awesome. What was that? You're good. All right, so now we're going to open up Cinema. Again, if you're not new, or if you're new to PCs, what I do is I just hit the little window on the keyboard and just start typing in Cinema. And then when you find it, you hit enter. Cinema 4D. Do you? That's awesome. It's fun. It has some really cool stuff in there, and Maya is actually getting, it has some of the cool stuff, but they still lack in some other areas. It's weird. Maya has been around since 1990s. And Cinema has been around since I think it's been around earlier than 2000s, but that's when it really got popular, was the 2000s. Then it kind of like disappeared for a while, and then it came back. It's crazy. Cool. So this is Cinema. Sweet. All right. So simple ones. Every program, I don't think I've ever found one that didn't have it. Control N is new scene. Control O is open. Control S is save. Those are pretty standard across the board. And then Control Shift S is save as. Before we do anything inside the software, what we want to do is tell it where our project is so that it knows where to find any textures or things that we're going to be working on. So under Edit, go to Preferences. Okay, so these are the preferences for Cinema 4D. Yeah, sometimes it takes a second, especially if it's the first time. Every day you come in, your first step, open up Cinema, and then go to Edit, and then go to Preferences, because every day these computers reset themselves, so you have to set up the preferences every day so that they're back to where they were, okay? Under Files, what we want to do is specify the texture path, okay? So it says Texture Path, and there's 3 dots. So go under Files, go to Texture Paths, and go to the dots, and point it to your project folder that you're working on. So in my case, it's going to be on my P drive.
Which one texture path do we click on first?
It doesn't matter, either one. Number 1 works perfectly because that's our first project. It'll actually load any of these in here. And then I'm just going to click on my mini room. So I find my mini room folder, and then we just hit OK. Okay.
When do we click on the menu room?
Yep, the mini room. And then just hit OK there. Yep. So what we should have there is your...
Need to click on which one of the folders
Nope, just mini room. What this does is it tells Cinema this is our project that we're working on, and so when it looks for textures, it's going to start to look inside that folder first, instead of trying to find it in some random location. Now what could happen is you're working here on this computer, and then you go home and you work on that computer, and then you come here and you work on this computer. Cinema will get confused as to where your textures are, okay? Anyone in here do web page design before? I know you have. Okay, so in web page design, if you're not aware of it, there is a location for where your files are. There's an absolute location. It's on my C drive, it's in this folder, it's in this folder, it's in that folder, and it's here. Okay, that works perfect on your computer, but if I took it to a different computer that didn't have that location, it doesn't work, right? So we need to create what are called relative locations. So what this does is set the stage for relative location for our textures. All right, another thing we may want to do in here is turn on autosave. Has anyone had a computer crash before?
Yes.
Everyone's hand should be up, otherwise you're lying to me right now. Okay, so you can set up autosave and you can tell it how often you want to autosave, okay? So you can say every 5 minutes, save it. And then you could also say I want to limit how many saves I have, so that if I'm working for an hour, how many saves would I get in that time? 12, right? So I would get 12 saves within that time. So in 3 hours, I would get 36, right? So not a huge deal. 36 is not a huge file, but you may want to limit it. You may want to say every 10 minutes. Especially at first, do an autosave. When you get to the point where it's quicker for you to just remodel it than to do anything, then that's, you don't need to use autosave. Or if you get to the point where you're like, I'm fine. If I had to redo 30 minutes, I wouldn't be upset about that. But if you have to do 3 hours worth of work because you haven't saved anything this entire time, that's a huge deal. And people have had that before, especially on finals. I don't know why they do not save anything. Cool. Recent files is fine. There's more stuff inside here. I don't think we need to play with anything else, though. I think everything else is good. Oh, point of interest. Under units, if you click on that, you will see that Cinema's default units are set to centimeters. Okay, now why that's important to us is if we're modeling something that we're going to be actually 3D printing, we would want to know how big is that object going to be, right? So when I modeled a phone holder, I need to know, I modeled this 10, what is 10, right? I need to know if it's 10 centimeters, 10 inches, 10 feet, whatever it is. So just make a note of it in case you ever get to that point of needing to see that. This does not affect at all what happens if we were to render out something and wanted to print it. Okay, so those prints up there, I didn't care what the units were in those. Those are just rendered out at a higher resolution so that they can be printed like that, okay? Cool. So that's all you really need to focus on in this. I think everything else should be good. All right, cool. All right, so let's go over the interface. It's completely different probably than anything you've used. Yeah, or hit OK. You should have an OK on there. I did hit the X, sorry, yep. I'm on auto mode sometimes. Cool. So the interface is completely different than stuff that you've seen before. This right here is our main work area, that viewport. This is a 3D world. You see a red, blue, and green arrow in the middle of yours? Okay. What do you think the red stands for? Mm-hmm. Do you know which axis? X, yep. What about green? And then blue? Z. Okay, there's a little cheat sheet on the bottom left of that same area, right? There's a little red, green, and blue thing. The trick to this is red, green, blue. Those are the colors of the monitor, right? The technology, the red, green, blue, RGB. Then X, Y, Z, so it's in the same order, okay? Every software is smart enough now, 3D software is smart enough now to know that red is always X, blue is Z, and Y is green. So that at least is universal, which is super helpful. Was that? RGB, yep. Now some do debate as to which direction is up. So in Cinema, Y is up. In Maya, Y is up. In Autodesk, Z is up. Okay, so just again, something to keep note of. If you print something like this, when I bring it to the printer, it's like that because it thinks that Y or Z is up in that case, and that was Z. Okay, so this is our main area we're going to be working in. We need to be able to move around in it, right? So Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, you would typically use a magnifier zoom tool to zoom in and out, and then you would use a hand tool to move around, okay? So I want you to think of us moving this as moving an actual camera, because that's what we're doing. So we wouldn't say move or zoom or magnify. We would actually say zoom in or zoom out or dolly or track or whatever, okay? So the first one we're going to do is called orbiting or tumbling. So if we hold Alt and we left click and drag, you'll see we can spin around our world. Woo. Okay, so there's our 3D stuff. We can spin around. Alt and left mouse. Cool. All right. Now, do keep in mind, too, that sometimes there is a delay or sometimes our focus for the mouse is in something else, right? So just pay attention. See this little white line right here on my screen? Right there. You probably see it on yours. If I click here or I click there, sorry, not the white line, the lighter gray. If I click in these other spots, those light up. And so sometimes when I'm switching from one of these to something else, there's a slight delay in getting from one to the other. So just be aware of that and don't freak out. Just try it again. Most likely it'll work, okay? So Alt left mouse will do that. Alt right mouse will zoom in and out. Okay, so you can use your Alt right mouse and zoom in and out. Now there is a difference between dragging up and down and dragging left and right. If you Alt drag left and right, you'll see it goes actually a bit quicker. If you go up and down, on mine at least, it seems like it's going a little bit slower. Okay, so just be aware of that, that there is a difference in those kinds of things. Some softwares like Photoshop, dragging one way zooms out and dragging another way zooms in. Just get used to it. Okay. Hit your middle mouse button. There you go.
I meant to, I'm not rotating with the...
With Alt and left?
Oh, I was hitting shift, never mind.
Yep. Yeah, it will take you some time to get used to that. None of these hotkeys are going to be automatic. If you watch any of the stuff that, any people who have used this for years, they're going to whiz around the keyboard and the mouse and whatever else. Sometimes I will do that too. If I don't explain something, just pull me back and tell me, what are you doing? Okay. Hold on. And sometimes I even forget what hotkeys are. Why is that working? Alt, middle, oh, stupid. So Alt and middle button will do what's called tracking or panning. Okay, move from one side, move to the other side. Okay, so we will need to use Alt, left, middle, and right every assignment all day long, every day. By 3 weeks goes by, you'll be an expert at using at least those buttons as long as you're playing with the software. Okay, so Alt left, Alt middle, and Alt right. And you'll see too, like as I'm zooming out, I'm clicking and dragging and letting go, and then clicking and dragging and letting go. So if you want to zoom out really far, you do that. You want to zoom in really close, you keep doing that. Okay. Now there's several menu areas. So there's a main menu up here, which I'm sure you're familiar with from other programs, but there's also a mini menu bar right here. Okay. So there's two different menu areas. So in here, we want to go to camera, we want to say navigation, and we want to turn on object mode. So under the mini menu, go to use navigation and then say object mode. Now I'm going to show you what that does. So I'm just going to create an object. You don't have to create one yet. Okay. So right now what I'm doing is I'm spinning around this object. Okay. So my camera right now is like looking directly at this object. As I orbit left, it still stays centered. As I orbit right, it still stays centered. If I don't have that on and I just set this to cursor mode, see how it's not orbiting around that object anymore. Okay, so it's like way off. So once I set that on there, and then I select that object, now it's orbiting around that object. Okay, even when it's way over here, it's still orbiting around that object. Okay, so that's another thing that when you come in every day, edit preferences and set your texture. And then the other thing to do is go to cameras, navigation, and do object mode. Okay, every day do those two things. Cool. All right, so now let's create an object. So there's obviously a create menu. You can create a whole bunch of stuff inside here. There's also this little drop down. So this drop down will have like the most popular stuff. So go inside here and create a cube, a cone, or a cylinder, any one of these top three.
Where are you?
Right under this little cube here, you just click and hold, and then go to cube, cone, or cylinder. Okay, so now we have a 3D object inside the scene. Now, a couple things again to kind of note on here. We have these little corners with the triangle in the corner of it. We also have arrows, a red, green, blue arrow, and we also have these dots on each face. Okay. Now, if we wanted to change the shape or perspective of these, what we can do is grab one of those dots and just drag it, and what it does is it stretches it out. So if I wanted this to be longer like that, like a 2x4, I can definitely reshape this to be more like a 2x4, okay? Now there's two areas that we would be playing with this. One area is this kind of like overall dimension shape changes, okay? The other side of that is actually going in there and grabbing individual pieces and moving the individual pieces around, right? So if I click off, those go away. I click back on, they come back. Okay, so no big deal there. You'll notice too on the far right side on the bottom that this thing also showed up. Click on your object and you'll see it. There you go. So this is basic information about it. Here's coordinates of where it is in my X, Y, and Z.
What if you accidentally...
Good. So each object actually stores where it's located. So in Photoshop, it doesn't say you've moved this to this location, but in 3D it does. Every object it saves, where is its X position, Y position, and Z position, what is its rotation, and what is its scale, okay? Now we also have under the object, this is all the settings for what this object looks like as far as proportions. So when I grab those dots and I stretch them out, it changes those values. And if I click and drag, you can actually see my values changing as I'm moving that along. All right. Now you see the size, that's the left numbers. And then you see the segments on the right side, okay? Even though we're working in centimeters, our sizing for what we're doing in this class doesn't matter. It's all about proportions. So if I build a chair that's 5 centimeters or 5,000 centimeters, it's not going to affect things too much in this class. When you get to later things and you're trying to build something that looks realistic, it will, okay? So we just kind of eyeball it for now. Now for segments, if you click these numbers, you'll see that they're not doing anything. Okay, so if I click little arrows, whoopsie. If I click little arrows at the top, the segments go up. Or if I click and drag upwards or click and drag downward, that also changes it. But you'll see that nothing is happening out here. Now in Illustrator, you guys have used the gradient mesh before, right? Okay, so if you look at the shape without actually being selected on it, you don't see any divisions. You just see the shape of it. That's what we're seeing is just the shape. What we want to see are all the divisions. So if we go to display and we say display Gurad shading lines, up here under display, yep. Now I can see the actual divisions. Okay. Now this is important because in any object that we are going to build, we need to know where divisions are because that's what's going to help us give us different shapes. So, there we go.
Hey, which one did you click on for those lines?
For these, any one of these. Okay, these are just the segments in the X direction, in the Y direction, and the Z direction. Do you have that on yours there, segments? Is what kind of object am I creating? What is the best startup shape? This guy here was actually created starting with a cube and then adding divisions and then tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until we got to the shape. Okay, so every object is going to have something new or different over here. So the default one, cube, most of you chose cube, just has XYZ segment or XYZ sizes and then has segments. Now you'll also see on here that it has separate surfaces, just ignore that for now, and it has fillet. So click on your fillet button. If you created a cylinder or a cone, you would have to go to the caps and then you would create the fillet from there. Okay, now what this does is it takes those hard edges and it makes them softer. Okay, so over the years, people have been working in 3D, there's just certain things that they found make things look more realistic. And one of them is having some sort of edge that is not sharp rock hard. If you look at any surface, no surface, it comes to an exact point with no kind of softening right there at the edge. Even this monitor, which looks like it's hard, I can actually see a soft little fillet that runs along this side. It's small, but it's still there, okay? So just like everything else, this device here has segments that I could add in, okay? The cube has it also, and it also has a radius. So again, depending on what kind of object I'm creating, I may want to add that fillet in right now, I may want to add it in later, I may want to do whatever, okay? So I just want you to kind of see that we have these options. You don't have to be masters of these yet, but just know that they're there. Just know that we have the option to do that. And as we start to play with them, you'll also see that we get controllers for each one of these. Okay, so I can control the size of that fillet even from here. Okay, so any object that we select, down here on the bottom right, we will get information about what we have selected. If it's a material, if it's an object, if it's a whatever, all the properties for it will be down in that area. I did something, there we go, messed that up. Okay, so this is our object properties or attributes. Up here is our object list. So every object in our scene will have a listed item there. So I make a cube, there's a cube. I make a cylinder, there's a cylinder. I make a million objects, there's a million objects right there, okay? Just like everything else, it's important to label every single thing. Illustrator, I'm sure you're familiar with that. When you do create an object, it makes a thing there that you should label. Photoshop, I can make 1,000 brush strokes and it doesn't. It's just whatever's on that layer, okay? So every object I make, it makes a thing there. You'll also see some other buttons here. We'll get into those buttons and what they do. There's also another menu right here. We'll again get into what all of those things do, okay? The entire interface is customizable. You can move things around, tweak it however you want, which is super awesome. Every program doesn't have that. There's also a layout up here, so if you do screw up and you start moving stuff where they shouldn't be going, and then you're like, oops, what did I do? You can just go back here and just say, give me back to the startup, and it'll just reset you. Happens all the time, okay? Also notice that there's tabs on the far right. Okay, so even for my attributes, we'll go to layers or attributes. You can switch between those. Usually that's where people get confused, is because they just don't know which one they're supposed to be at. Cool. All right, so I'm going to delete my cylinder here. I'm just going to go back to the cube and just reposition that. All right, so we've created an object. We can see where the attributes are for it. Let's talk about moving the object around. So on your hotkey sheet, you'll see transforming. This is where all the moving, rotating, and scaling are. So what is the hotkey for move? E, right? So we go to E. We have 3 arrows red, green, blue, and we have these triangle corner things. The triangle corner things allow you to move it in 2 directions, okay? So let's pretend for just the sake of mine.
Wait, where did you just go?
Just hit E.
E for what?
Just E on your keyboard, and you should get these arrows.
Soft selection.
Soft selection. E, it brought me to the attributes for the move tool is what that's showing. So just ignore this down here for now. We don't need to worry about that. Just make sure you have the arrows. Do you have the arrows?
I have the arrow.
Okay, good. Okay. So for using the arrows, you just simply grab an arrow, make sure it's highlighted, and you can move it wherever you want. Okay? The corner ones, let's say this object is on the ground. I never ever want to just grab it and just start moving it because, okay, it looks like it's on the ground here and kind of set back. It's not, it's floating. Okay? So what the corner ones are good for is I know this is flat on the ground. I can grab this one, which only moves it in the X and Z, not in the Y, and that lets me replace it on the floor wherever I need it to be. Okay? Which is important because you render something out, it may be floating and you don't realize it until after. Okay? So just move the item around. Just get used to moving it around. We're not doing anything specific. Control Z is your undo, so you can hit Control Z if you move it too far or you do something bad. It's beautiful. Okay, so that's the move tool. Rotate tool is R. It's the pirate's favorite hotkey. All right, so rotating. You can rotate X, Y, or Z. You can also rotate what's called perpendicular to the camera. Okay, so this outer ring here, oh, I guess not. Why isn't that working? Is it working now? Yeah, okay. So it wasn't working a second ago. So I can rotate perpendicular to the camera by grabbing that outer ring. Or I can just click randomly and rotate it randomly. Never rotate it randomly, okay? It screws everything up, especially if you're trying to animate it. Never really use that outer ring. Don't use that either. If I want to rotate this, I would grab just the green, and then just the red, and then just the blue. And there's reasons for that, so just trust me on it for now, but there are reasons we don't do that. Okay? Now if you hold down Shift as you're rotating, watch what happens. Okay? So start dragging and then hold Shift, and then you'll see that amazingness happen. Now if you hold Shift while you're rotating, and then you click the Control key, and then drag, and then you let go of the Control key. You see how something like shows up there? Control is an automatic copy, so just be careful because if I were just to let go of my mouse, it would actually make a copy of that and leave it right there. Okay, so for now we don't need a copy, it doesn't matter if you have it, but just be aware that Control, if you move something, rotate it, or scale it, it will actually just copy that item. Okay, so we can move, we can rotate. Oops. And then scale is which one?
Scale is
T.
T.
Do you notice anything about their placement on the keyboard?
ERT.
ERT, right next to each other. Okay. Now try to scale this in only one direction. You can't do it. It's impossible. Right now the object is locked in this mode where it's trying to maintain its original shape. So if we were to scale this in one direction, this bevel right here would get stretched out, and right now the software says, no, you can't do that, because it doesn't want us to do that, because it's like safeguarding it, I guess. But we can have it do it. So if we were to hit the C key, so just hit C on your keyboard, now I can grab the green, and now I can just stretch the green out. Okay, and then you can see what it does is it does deform that bevel. So I had a nice little bevel on the edge, it looked nice and round, and now it's stretched out and looks disgusting, but I can do it. Okay, so what C does is, oops, let me go back another step or two. There we go. Okay, So when I click on my object, you've seen this, right, where we have these little dots that we can adjust the size of things. Okay, and all of our bevels will move with it too. So if we have a round bevel on one edge, it's the same bevel on all the edges, regardless of how small. Like if I go too small, it won't work. Like I can't go any smaller than that. Okay, so the bevel stays updated the entire time. Was that good? Okay. So we can use these to scale it up or whatever, but this is still in. It's not editable. I can't grab these edges and move them around to the faces or any of that. So this guy up here, if you look at that thing at the very top left of mine, yours probably doesn't have it anymore. It says make editable. And what that does is it takes us out of that mode where we can't do that. So see how I have this object and it has all these settings and I can tweak this stuff? The second I hit C or I click that button, those go away. The object thing is gone from here, so I can't edit that bevel or fillet that's on there. I don't have those dots anymore. And any tweaking that I do is now going to be distorting that as a flattened out shape, basically. Okay? So there are certain times where we will click that C button in order to do that. Other times we don't want to do that yet. Okay? Cool? All right. So ERT, that's our move, rotate, and scale. Pay attention for 2 seconds at my move tool. See how my move tool can change directions? So this one is world movement. So it's using a move tool based on the world's position. This one is object's position, okay? So if my object is rotated like this and I want to move it in that direction, that would be an object movement. But if I want to physically move it up and down like this, I would set that to world position, okay? Or if I want to slide it, it's on here, and I want to slide it along the ground, I would set that to world in order to make sure it stays on the ground, because right now, oops, come on, right now it would move at some downward angle, okay? So that's the W key. So just be careful of that too. You can see it changing right here. Okay, cool. What else? Okay, let's say we want to grab some of these points on here. I want to grab these points and move them around. So if I come down here to where it says points, it changes my model into what's called point mode. Okay, so click the points. Now I'm in point mode, and now I can grab points. Other softwares have this. I don't know why Cinema doesn't. If I click and drag, it does nothing. Okay, I have to go over here to the select tool. There are several of them. I have to select stuff, and then I can actually move those items. Okay, one of these is a live selection. I'm basically like painting what I want to select. I rarely use that one. Most of the time I just use this rectangle selection. Rectangle selection, marquee it, and then I can drag this and move it wherever I need to. Okay, so I can switch back and forth to that tool and then move it around. Okay, even me who's been in this for several years, it still takes me, I still screw up sometimes and accidentally switch to, let's say, scale, and then or rotate, and I try to marquee, and it doesn't marquee because I'm now in rotate tool. I have to jump back to it, re-grab something, re-switch to rotate, and then rotate that item around. Okay, now there is a hotkey between what we were just on and what we are currently on. So if we just tap the space bar, it'll switch between the last two tools. So if I hit the space bar, now I'm in the marquee. Hit the space bar again, I'm back to rotate. Space bar again, space bar, space bar, space bar. Okay, I don't have that one on the hotkey list. If you want to add it, you totally could. So that's how we add or edit points. Yes, sir. If you want to go back several steps, then you would just go back to that key, right? So I would go back to the move tool or the rotate or scale, and then I could hit that tab space bar again. Yeah, it would be nice. In some software there is, this one does not. Okay, so these are the points. If I wanted to edit the lines, which are called edges, I would hit the Enter key or go down to the edges here. Okay, two different ways to do it. Now, if we're only selecting a ring of edges or a single edge, we can stay within that Move tool or Scale tool or Rotate tool. So for edges, I typically don't need the rectangle selection. I'll stay in the Move tool and just double click one of the edges, or single click an edge and then move it. Okay, so that's how we can move edges around. If we double click it, it grabs the edges all the way around in a circle. Just to be in the Move tool, make sure you're selected on edges. All right, so those are edges, and then, I think Cinema actually calls them lines. No, they call them edges. At one point, they called them lines. And then we hit Enter again, and now we're going to go to Faces. Okay, so the interface is at least smart enough to kind of bunch things together. So when we're in the Move, Rotator, Scale, and Selection, those guys are right here at the top. When we're doing points, edges, or faces, those are going to be over here. Okay, so you can very easily see that. All right, now you're going to forget about this, and that's no big deal, but hit the L key, and now try to move something. You can't, correct. You hit L, and you can still move something, because at some point you're going to accidentally hit L, and then you won't be able to move stuff, and you have to know what you did. So the L key is actually your pivot tool. So let's say that I wanted to create this item inside my scene, and what I wanted to do was rotate it like this. Okay, so the pivot for it's going to be down here. By default, it's like up in the middle of this. So I would hit L, I would move the pivot down here, and then I would hit L again to get out of that tool. Usually what happens is people hit the L key on accident, and they try to just move their object, and they can't do it.
L kind of like a direct select?
Nope, it's just access. Like, where is that pivot tool?
It's like an anchor point in Photoshop or
Or in After Effects, yep. So if you go over here, it says Enable Access, that's the L key. So that's how you would know if you're in that. Okay, so just make sure you're not in that when you move stuff around. All right, so we're in our object mode, or our face mode. We want to get back. We click up here, back to Model. And now we're selected back on the entire model and can move the entire model around, as long as our L key is not clicked on.
wait, where's the model?
Right here. But you have to make sure that you have, yeah, that should be good.
It's not moving.
Are you in the Move tool?
Oh, I am in now.
There you go. Okay. Now there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll start playing with once we get to those points. It's too much for today especially. So just to show you where things are at, these are materials down here on the bottom. There's our timeline right here for when we do animations. Yeah, this is setting things. That's pretty much all we need to know for that specific area. Okay. So let's clear our scene out. You can grab the objects up here and just delete them. Okay? Or you can click on them and delete them any other way. Just make sure your scene is basically back to blank. If you do, let's say for whatever reason, hit Control-N on your file and you make a new scene, the other scene is still in the background. So don't think you've lost it. It's still just kind of hidden in the background. Okay? And you would access it by going to Window and then finding it on the bottom. All right, so what we want to do is we're going to start our mini room project. Okay? So let's go to File and let's go to Save As. Okay? Or hotkey Control-Shift-N or S. Control-Shift-S. Just selecting them up here and then just hitting the Delete or Backspace keys should do it.
Save as what?
Hold on. Go to your folder, right? So we should be on the P drive. So on the P drive, go to your folder, go to 2510, go to Mini Room, go to Scenes. Okay, and then on your cheat sheet, it says what to call your files, right? So I'm going to call mine Sarcona underscore miniroom underscore 001. Okay, so I make sure that's in my scenes folder. Now I know exactly when I leave today, I need to back up my entire folder because all of my stuff is inside that. So I grab my Sarcona W18, throw it on my flash drive, and then I'm good to go. All right, couple things. We have autosave turned on, so every, in my case, 10 minutes, it should autosave, or 5 minutes, I forget what I said too. There's also a save incremental. So if I just click that, watch my count at the top. It says 001. So I'm going to go to save incremental, 002. Okay? So if you want to just automatically save as the next one, you don't have to save as and then rename it. You just do save incremental, and it'll automatically just add 1 to your number. And if something happens, our computer crashes, a file gets corrupt, we can just go back to the latest number and we know which one's good. Okay? So we're going to make a room. This is going to be a mini room project. We'll fill out our sheet next class, but for now we'll just create a cube. And you're going to size it up to be a plenty big room. Okay? Remember, it doesn't matter as far as the actual dimensions of it. It's more about proportions. Okay? So if I go, just so we can see this, if I go like that, that's a really weird proportioned room to have. That's like, I don't know what that would be. A really long hallway or something. A banquet hall, that's exactly it. I don't have a banquet hall. Okay? So maybe like that. Okay? Don't worry about my numbers, just worry about proportions. Okay? We are never going to model things the exact same way. Just try to get something that looks relatively squarish, but is shorter vertically in the Y direction. Okay? When you're happy with it, then what we need to do is delete some faces. Okay? We can't delete faces in this mode. This mode does not allow us to edit the components. I can't get to faces, I can't get to edges, I can't get to points. How do I get to be able to select those? There was a key that I have to hit. Anyone remember? It's C, make editable. Okay? So this little guy up here on the top left, that button there, and then this, or the C key, just click one of those. Okay, so just hit C on your keyboard is the best way to do it because then it's a hotkey. Just hit the C key. Okay, and then we want to go to our face mode, our polygons, and just delete one of the edge faces so we can actually just see inside it. Okay, as we start putting stuff in our room.
Do we just click on an edge face?
Yep, just click. We'll just click on this, click on the face, and hit delete.
Nothing happened.
Once you hit C, you can't like change the dimensions anymore. Is that true?
You can still scale it, right? Not that button. If I go back to my model mode, and I go back to scale, I can then scale it like this. Okay? The only thing I don't get are the dots now. Or if I want to add the little fillets, I don't get that. Okay? So yeah, we can still change the dimensions of things, it just gives us limitations. Oh, you just didn't hit C yet. Hit C first. There you go. So now you can select that. So go to your move tool, hit E, and then click on one of these faces there. Yep. Just click it, and then hit delete. There we go. Yep. And then hit C, and grab that face and delete it.
Go back real quick.
Remember, we gotta go to face there. Yep.
How do I get the little
The dots?
Yeah.
You're not clicked on this.
Okay.
Now you get them.
Oh, okay. That's way. All right. Got it.
Sean,
Mhm.
I was thinking like for this room going with arches up on the roof to kind of go a little bit different with it. How do I get the divisions again?
You'd have to undo it to get back before you did that. So hit undo, Control Z, keep going until that object comes back. There it is.
Okay, object.
Yep. Yep, that's good. So now hit C, and then go to the faces, and then click the face we want to delete, and then delete it. There we go.
Now, how do I get to view the divisions?
Under display,
All right.
and then the lines there. Nope, next one. Yep.
Okay, there
So now you can adjust your segments. So we could take this anywhere we want with this. Like it could sit right here in the middle of the ground, but it's annoying to have this grid like cutting through our room. So what I want to do is I want to place this exactly on the floor. So I'm going to switch to a different view so I can see where the floor is and where my object is and move it right there. Here it's difficult because as I move this up and then I rotate, it may not be flat with the floor, okay? So your middle button is also a trigger that switches to 4 views. So just tap the middle button.
Yeah, I found that out.
Yes, you did. And then if you look at the top left corner, it'll say right, front, or top. The top view is not going to help us out in this. The right or the front will, okay? So I'm going to go to my right view and just middle click in there and then just move this up until it's pretty much flush on the floor. It doesn't have to be perfect, but pretty much. Where are you at? Do you have this? The good thing with 3D is that for the most part, anything that we're doing, we can always come back and adjust. And nothing we're doing is going to be something that's going to take us 10 weeks to do, and we'd have to go back to square one and redo it, okay? It's all pretty much module. Mm-hmm.
Where I'm trying to move up.
It did duplicate?
I think so, yeah, but I'm not holding control or anything.
Just like I grabbed this face and deleted it, I can also just grab this face and just push it out or push it in, okay? So we're never locked to things, don't think you are. Just be aware of it and feel free to play with that. If you're not sure, save as, play with it. If you destroy it, go back to the previous version, okay? All right, so there's our room. We should give the flooring some color because the floor as gray looks pretty disgusting. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the bottom where it says create, edit, function, and texture, and we're just going to double click in that area. Okay? Yes, sir. All right, so you don't have to do this part. I'm going to do this just so you can see it. I'm going to control double click that so that it brings up a separate editor. On the far right screen, sometimes people have a hard time seeing that, so I just control double click my material and it makes it pop out so that obviously you can see what it looks like. So first thing, I want to give this a name. We may have for this scene 10 different materials. Each material should have a different name. Each object should also have a different name. So this is going to be our floor underscore M. Floor underscore material is what the M stands for. You don't have to. If you go to the basic, you can change it there. It's the same spot. Or you can right click on here and go to rename and change it there too, okay? All of these tabs that you guys have on the right are things that I have here. I have extra ones just because they list basically everything, okay? So looking at this, let's say we want our floor to be, in this case, brown, like our carpeting in the classroom. So Cinema uses by default an HSV slider. It stands for hue, saturation, and value. You will find, hopefully like I do, that this slider is pretty much like better than every slider in the world. Because if I want this to be that color, I go to that color and then I can choose how much saturation is in there and I can choose how much value is in there and it will change that color. As opposed to an RGB, which you can click on right there, see RGB is right there. This, you're basically like mixing colors to get the color you want. So I really prefer HSV. If you've never used it before, just play with it. You'll see the benefits of using that over traditional RGB sliders. Okay, so I'm going to pick a brownie kind of color for the floor, make it kind of dark brown, a bit desaturated. That's good. Okay. When we look at any material, we have to look at what is it actually, what are the properties of each thing, right? So the color of this floor is that brown kind of color. Looking at this lamp that's over here and over there, this top white part, the color of this is white, but it's also a bit transparent. It's also a bit reflective, and it's also probably got some subsurface scattering kind of stuff going on inside of it, okay? This chromy part here, the color of this is probably no color at all, okay? Because all of its color is basically coming from reflection. So as we get further into what materials look like, we will start analyzing how we get things that are in the real world to look like stuff in the CG or vice versa. Okay, so color is simply that, like how much of the actual color is that. For the floor, we're just leaving it as brown. We will adjust it so we can add materials or textures to it. On yours, by default, you have color, reflectance, illumination, edit, and assign. If you head to the basic tab, you have checkboxes that you could turn on all of the other ones too. We don't need all of these on, so by default, they're all off. One that I do want to put on though is bump. So I'm going to check the bump box. And what bump does is it fakes a texture. It fakes some kind of like bumpiness to the surface. So the brick wall that's over here, if I wanted my wall in my room to look like this brick wall, I would have the color be this kind of like off-white, and then I would add a bump that would add in all the lines here and then all these little pits that are inside those blocks, okay? That's how we would do it. So in order to create that bump, we've created it, but it doesn't know what it's supposed to look like. So we go to this texture here under bump. So you may have to switch to your bump tab. Go to the texture for it, and then we're just going to simply add, in this case, a noise, okay? On yours, you should be able to go to basic, make sure bump is checked, and then go to bump. Okay, good. And then go here, and then you can go to noise. Okay, now any material or any texture, because what we just did is add a texture to that item. Any texture that gets created, we did that by clicking this arrow, and then to edit it, we can click right on this word where it says noise. Okay, so once we click it, now we can go in there and actually specify what does this noise look like. And you would be surprised, there's a lot of different definitions of what noise can be. If you go to the noise dropdown, all of these are different noise patterns inside the software, okay? For now, the standard noise is perfect enough, okay? We can change things like scale. So if we render this out and we look at our floor, these bumps may be like this big on the floor, or they might be super tiny, we can't even see them. So we may want to come in here and adjust the scale. That's why you can't focus on just my numbers, because your scene is going to be different for every single thing. My scale may be perfect at 100% right here. You may need to adjust yours to 50% or 4,000%, okay? It's all about developing an eye for what is going to look good, right? So for now, leave it at 100, leave all the defaults, good enough. We can close that window, okay? If you have the window open. So now I need to assign it to the floor. If I assigned it right now as it stands, it would assign it to the entire object. What I want to do is, just like we were able to isolate that face and delete it, I want to isolate the bottom face and assign that material to it, okay? So I'm going to go back to faces, I'm going to click on the face, and then drag that material right on top of it. And then I clicked on the face here, clicked on the actual face that I want that material on, and then I just drag this right on top of it. And then if I go back to my model mode, I can see how big it's going to be. Now what we're seeing is a preview of what this is going to look like. We don't know if this is actually what it would look like inside the scene. So what we're going to do is hold down Shift and tap the R key. Okay, this pops open what's called Picture Viewer, and this is actually what the object looks like when it gets rendered out. So you can see, let me brighten this up a bit. Where would I go for that? Filter, enable filter, contrast, brightness. You can see that better, cool. Okay, so now we can actually see what that texture looks like. So if this view shows us something looking really big or really small, we can go back and tweak it. Don't worry about tweaking it now, okay? At some point before we do our final renders, we'll go back and tweak a bunch of stuff. Right now it's a placeholder just to kind of separate this is the floor, okay? So I can close that window. And I'm going to make a material for the ceiling and a material for the walls. So what's my first step in making material? Double clicking. Yep, double click down here. You can go to create, but it gives you more options. We don't need that. Just double click. And then give it a name. So this will be, in this case, I'll go walls first, wall_m. I'll give it a color. And I'll give it a bump. And I'm using the same exact bump that I used before. Just a standard, it's going to look ugly, I don't care, but it's good enough for what we're doing for this. All right, so if yours is like mine, it looks pretty disgusting and horrible, but it's fine for what we're doing now. I want to point out a couple things as we are looking at this. So I'm just going to create a cube real quick just so we can demonstrate this. So here's my cube. If I drag a material onto the cube here or drag it there, either way it does the same exact thing, okay? So there's that cube. Now looking at this item here, there's my cube. You'll see on the far right that it has a texture tag and it says ceiling M, okay? Cinema will lay out all the tags, is what they're called, the material tags and other tags that are associated with it on the right side, okay? This material here, which is my floor, has a orange triangle next to it. The reason it does is because I've selected just the face, assigned it to the floor, and what it does is it says, okay, whatever is in this selection gets that material. And then whatever is in this selection gets that material. Whatever is in this selection gets that material, okay? So as you start assigning things, just be aware of that, because what you don't want to do is clutter up your interface ever. So if I grab this face and I drag this on here, I still have the green, and I still have this, and I still have that. And then I grab this one. You're not doing this, you're just watching. So I'm just dragging materials onto different areas of this. And you can see every time I do that, it's creating a new tag and a new material swatch. And now what's sucky about that is that even though no longer is there any white on here or green on here, it doesn't care. All it does is just add to each one of those that same thing. So I've actually replaced all the corners or all the sides of this with that same material, but look at how messy this whole area is, okay? So we want to keep our stuff clean, so as you start texturing things, if there are multiple faces, grab all the multiple faces and then assign it. And what that does is it gives you one nice little piece here, and then there'll be one here, There we go. So now it's nice and neat. There's not like a million things there, okay? For this one, it doesn't matter, but just going forward, just be aware of that, okay? Now, some of the properties that we may want to adjust on this, if I click on my wall, and I'm going to control click it so I can pop it out. Under the bump, there's another attribute that I may want to adjust, which is called strength, okay? So the divots here in the wall, let's say they go back a centimeter. If I put a bump on there and it only went back like a half a centimeter, I could double the strength and it would push it back further, okay? So this is how much it's actually bumping out. So I'm going to set it on the walls to like 3, okay? So I set my strength for my bump to 3%. I'm also going to go to the texture for it, and for mine, I'm going to make it like 150. And then I'm just going to get at a better angle so I can see this. And that looks a lot better than it did a second ago. That actually looks like, if this was painted, it looks like it could be actual like paint details to it, okay? So for mine, the bump number here, 3%, that was a good number. The noise, I went to 150. Those two seem to be good numbers for me. Don't worry about getting them exact now. Just know where they're at, so at some point you can come back and tweak that one. I'm also going to do the floor. The floor may be a little bit more bumpy. And yep, and I set that bump value to 120, or that global scale to 120. And then I'll do the same thing for the ceiling. I think probably 2% for the ceiling and 200 for the scale. Oh, no, it still looks gross. Oops. There we go. All right. Oh, I set it to 0. Why is it like that? Oop, 200 is way too much if I do that. All right, so there's where it was before. I'm going to go back to my bump and maybe even set this down to like 0.25%. There we go. Nice and soft. All right, you may notice that our from different angles, we're getting different results. So here, I'm really losing a lot of my detail. From here, this back wall is like blown out, all right? There's a, let me close this so we can see it. Inside the materials, there's a reflectance tab. And what the reflectance is how much light is reflecting on that surface. By default, we get a directional light, which just basically like blasts light into the scene. We'll have real lights, but it's still going to do a similar thing. So what I want to do is come to the reflectance tab on each one of my items. First, change it to Ward. That's what I want. And then take the roughness up, and then take the specular strength down. Okay, so my roughness is, let's say, 95, and my specular strength is, let's say, 5. That didn't help it at all. Let me try a different one. I'm going to try Beckman. Nope, I think it's just the lighting in my scene is just horrible too. Yep, so on your reflectance, change it to change it to Ward. And then you can render it and change the roughness to 95 and the specular to 5. All of these types are different ways that it's calculating the kind of reflections. So something like a CD has different reflections than a car. There's different reflections than just a piece of chrome back here. Okay, so on each one of my items, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to go to Ward. I'm going to say 95% and 5. Oops, that's done. All right. After you get a couple of these and you have it, Shift R rendered out, you may notice that there's a list building on the right side of your screen. These are all of our previous renders. So what's neat about that is Cinema saves all of our renders, so we can hit the up arrow and actually cycle through all the renders to see what the iterations look like. And what's cool is if we keep the same camera angle, we can really see these are the settings and these are things updating. This one, again, because this is our mini room, we're playing with things, it is not going to look good. I don't care if this looks good when I grade this one. I'm literally verifying that you have objects in the scene, you have materials, you use textures, you use lights, it's a nice camera move, it's the same length, and that's it. I'm not looking for how well do the walls look like actual walls or the floor look like an actual floor, okay? We just want simple stuff for now. Eventually we'll make it more better. That's the correct phrasing for that sentence. All right. All right. Now, just as a disclaimer, this stuff is super boring, right? It's already like, it gets better, okay? It gets more fun the more we actually get into animating and building stuff. It looks cool and doesn't look like ugly green walls. Next week when we come back, we'll actually start adding objects in the room, we'll start adding lights in the room, we'll start adding textures, and then things start looking a lot better. It's killing me too, just so you know. Yes, we do. Okay, so let's save our stuff. As far as we're going to take this one today, Monday we are not here because of the break, and then Wednesday when we come back, we'll start putting in a desk, we'll start putting in a chair, bookcases, books, other items in the scene. Cool. Save your scene, so hit Control S, and then you can just close Cinema down. Just save and then close it. And then when you back your stuff up, take that winter 2018 folder, drop it onto your thumb drive or drop it onto your Dropbox account or wherever you have it. And then when you come in next time, you'll drag it back in here. Every time you come in, your stuff may be gone. Just prepare for that. It's not a guarantee that these computers are safe, that they will not crash, that anything. So make sure you have a backup somewhere of your stuff. You don't want to lose what we did today. Cool? Questions? No? All right.